In the wake of the First World War, factories across Europe and America turned out consumer goods that improved the lives of workers. Everything from automobiles to cigarettes to beer was becoming cheaper and more plentiful, challenging the Marxist prediction that capitalism was on its last legs and the revolution was at hand.
Marx and Engels just thought that capitalism had contradictions, had internal contradictions, which spelled its doom. So obviously Marx was wrong. As Marxists discovered to the chagrin in the 1920s, the proletariat, the working class, was not constantly rising up and overthrowing capitalism. What I like to say is, if any doctor ever says, and I have a late-stage cancer, I want it to be a Marxist doctor, because that means I'll live forever, because they're always coming up with late-stage capitalism, and capitalism survives.
Welcome back. At the turn of the 20th century, even his closest disciples had begun to lose faith in Karl Marx's promise of a global uprising. The Russian Revolution of 1917 changed that. One of its leaders, Vladimir Lenin, believed he now held the key to unleashing the revolution promised by Marx. His argument? That the violent overthrow of capitalism required not only workers, but intellectuals, a group he called the vanguard of the proletariat. World War I proved disastrous for Russia. A series of defeats on the battlefield left the country with 5 million casualties, rampant inflation, and widespread food shortages. The result was a violent backlash against Tsar Nicholas II. At the head of one revolutionary faction was the 47-year-old Marxist Vladimir Lenin. In March, a provisional government succeeded in toppling the Tsar and promised to hold democratic elections when order was restored. But in October, a second revolt destroyed the interim government and swept to power Lenin and his fellow communists. Called Bolsheviks, they believed they could now foster the global revolution predicted by Marx.
Well, Lenin had noticed that the proletariat didn't seem particularly interested in revolution. His contribution to Marxist-Leninism was to introduce this concept of the vanguard of the proletariat, a new group that had to be trained and motivated to lead the proletariat to revolution.
Lenin argued the vanguard was the essential element Marx had missed. If history was not moving fast enough, it would be the vanguard that would provide the accelerant. As his fellow theorist Alexander Parvus put it in 1918, the essence of Bolshevism is simple: to ignite the revolution everywhere, not choosing the time, regardless of the political situation and other historical realities. And the conversation with the enemies is short. They are subject to urgent and unconditional destruction. To the Bolsheviks, a world upended by the Great War seemed ripe for revolution. Throughout Europe, socialist parties were on the rise. Even in America, a growing number of leftists now saw communist Russia as a model for the future. The progressive journalist Lincoln Steffens visited Moscow in 1919 and reported, "I have seen the future, and it works." The American war correspondent and poet John Reed was equally enthusiastic, writing in his account of the Russian Revolution, 10 days that shook the world. "I suddenly realized that the devout Russian people no longer needed priests to pray them into heaven. On earth, they were building a kingdom more bright than any heaven had to offer, and for which it was a glory to die." But once again, the supposedly inevitable world revolution stalled. When Germans attempted their own version of a Bolshevik uprising in 1918, they were brutally repressed. Why did workers in the most advanced capitalist countries, the very people who were supposed to most desire economic change, resist revolution? An Italian intellectual, Antonio Gramsci, came up with a new explanation and a new theory. His ideas would have consequences far beyond Italy and lay the foundation for culture wars being fought today.
In Italy, it began when an ambitious rabble-rouser set his followers marching on Rome.
In 1922, Benito Mussolini seized power in Rome, outlawing all opposition. Gramsci, who had helped create the Italian Communist Party, was sent to prison.
And the prosecutor famously said, we need to stop his brain from working. So that is a really bad idea, as we know from the Apostle St. Paul or from Gramsci himself. If you want somebody's brain to stop working, don't send him to prison, because they have a lot of time to think and write. And there he asks himself the question, why were Marx and Engels wrong? Why has revolution failed everywhere else except for this backwater called Russia?
He worked from prison to produce a lot of new ideas based on Marx, but expanding on them.
Gramsci developed a theory of what he called cultural hegemony, arguing that capitalists maintain authority not just by controlling the means of production, but by controlling the culture itself. In Gramsci's view, Western institutions like marriage, family, and organized religion are tools to control the working class. For Marxism to win, these institutions must fail, and only their destruction would allow a socialist society to rise from the ashes. Gramsci declared, "Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media, by transforming the consciousness of society." At the heart of Gramsci's revisionist view of socialism was a new emphasis on what Marx and Engels had called false consciousness. What did they mean by that? Basically, that workers had been duped and simply didn't know what was good for them.
One of Gramsci's important contributions was that he looked much more at this idea of false consciousness. What Gramsci theorized was that the ruling classes had actually imposed this false consciousness upon the people through means of what he called cultural hegemony. The various norms, institutions, and values that make up what we would call Western civilization. He said you really needed to look at those norms, institutions, and values from the angle that they were imposed by the ruling classes.
Recall that you can find this in Marx and Engels. Many people are familiar with Marx and Engels' statement that religion is the opium of the masses. Gramsci makes that central, that there's this whole superstructure of belief that we call culture that reinforces the existing power system, which is the capitalists exploiting the workers, and that we can't expect to get the revolution we want unless we can make an assault on the dominant culture and create a new set of beliefs and ideas that are so persuasive that through them the proletariat will see its true interest in overthrowing the system and bringing about socialism.
Stop thinking and believe in me, bellowed Mussolini, and I will restore the glory that was Rome.
The people answered, Duce, Duce.
By the 1930s, a new and dangerous ideology was on the rise across Europe. Fascism grafted the socialist idea of state control onto the emotional appeal of nationalism, a powerful mix that promised a return to greatness for societies ravaged by World War I. Marx had predicted that the nation-state would wither away and workers across the world would unite. Instead, across Europe, they were at each other's throat. While Gramsci pondered why the Marxist revolution had failed, a new generation of scholars gathered in Germany to continue and expand on Marx's work, with the help of the very capitalists they hoped to destroy.
Felix Weil is a wealthy German. His father had made a bundle in Argentina, and they come back to Germany, and Felix Weil decides to fund the Institute for Social Research. It's known colloquially as the Frankfurt School to us. They actually called it Marx Cafe. And what they wanted to do was investigate the superstructure, investigate what was it about society that had prevented the worker from overthrowing the superstructure.
And it was one of the first academic centers that came about to explicitly espouse Marxism. It becomes a contributor to a revival and acceleration of Marxist thought. So they're kind of riding on the waves of the Soviet Revolution. Although they're offering a different version of Marxism than Bolshevism, but they're still in the broader Marxist world. They're publishing some of his works that had previously been unfinished manuscripts and trying to drive scholarship forward around Marxism.
The scholars of the Frankfurt School observed a very different world than the one known by Marx. Mass production had become the order of the day.
Mass production and the assembly line drove the price of a Model T down from $850 to $300. Now everybody could have one.
By 1930, there were more than 30 million automobiles on the road, creating a new level of personal freedom and mobility. Homes were electrified, making possible labor-saving devices like electric stoves, clothes washers, and refrigerators. Mass media, moving pictures, and then radio
Does your cigarette taste different lately?
sent information and entertainment far and wide. Everywhere they looked, Marxists now saw products and services created by capitalism, designed to satisfy the needs and desires of the working class. Edward Bernstein and Antonio Gramsci had anticipated this would keep workers in check, but the scholars at the Frankfurt School included a new dimension to explain why the revolution had not yet arrived.
The Frankfurt School explain it by taking the roots of Marxism, taking Marx's works, taking Lenin's ideas, and then adding to it some observations from other schools. It was an interdisciplinary effort, so it added observations from sociology, from philosophy, particularly existentialist philosophy, and indeed from psychoanalysis. But what comes out is nothing less than a replacement of a critique of capitalism with a critique of Western civilization itself.
It was an inflection point in Marxist thought. By turning away from class struggle and toward broader questions about society, the Frankfurt School laid the groundwork for arguments that still resonate today about consumerism, the media, race, identity, and gender. It would come to be called Marxist cultural analysis.
Ihre eigenen Parteien, und zwar nicht eine, das wären zu wenige, es müssen gleich 3, 4 sein.
The fall of the Weimar government in 1933 and the rise of Adolf Hitler forced the leaders of the Frankfurt School to make a decision, one that would alter the fortunes of the school's most prominent members.
Hitler seizes power in Germany, and they are very much on the outs with the Nazi political movement. So what they do is most of the school packs up and moves to the United States and become American academics.
They come to America in the They're fascinated with America. But they hate the American worker just as much as they hated the European worker. Even worse, the people who sprung them from the Third Reich, who gave them this escape hatch, were complete boors. We're complete, nabobs. They do not see the oppression they live under.
Two of the leading members of the Frankfurt School made their way to Southern California. Max Horkheimer had developed what he called critical theory, which would become the basis of today's critical race theory and critical legal theory. In Horkheimer's view, objectivity was impossible. There were no universal truths, just different versions of reality based on individual perception. All the underpinnings of Western society were open to re-examination. Marxist theory alone was beyond question and represented eternal and scientific facts that could not be challenged.
Critical theory has a philosophical analytical role, but it also has a practical role and a normative role. So it says not just that we need to look at society in this particular way, but we should also have some standards for what society should look like, and we should have a practical means of getting to them. So critical theory is always aiming towards the dismantling of Western civilization and its replacement with something else. What that something else is often very hard to discern. Critical theory has often defined itself as being anti-something. You must be anti-racism, anti-sexism, whatever. What it is actually for, other than being anti these things, is often very hard to discern.
In critical theory, the way I describe it is just a howitzer aimed at all the institutions of society. It's just, we're going to denigrate all the institutions of society and to criticize them to bits in order to undermine them and be able to introduce our new idea. And if you read between the lines, the new idea really is central planning. It's very clear that what they want is collectivism. They're Marxists. They're Marxists to the core.
Accompanying Horkheimer to California was his close collaborator, Theodor Adorno, author of the influential book, The Authoritarian Personality. He argued that respect for tradition and authority, and even conventional notions about honor and self-respect, reveal a tendency toward fascism. He even developed a multiple-choice questionnaire that he said showed who had secret fascist tendencies and who did not. Los Angeles in the 1940s turned out to be ground zero for all that the Frankfurt School despised. Hollywood had emerged as the dream factory for America's growing middle class. If Marx believed religion was a drug that sedated the masses, Horkheimer and his colleagues saw Hollywood as 10 times worse. Even Disney played its part in capitalist suppression. According to Adorno, Donald Duck in the cartoons and the unfortunate victim in real life receive their beatings so that the spectators can accustom themselves to theirs. All the trappings of American life were just an extension of the capitalist superstructure, part of an overall plan to keep the revolution at bay.
It's the new me.
Why put up with a set that isn't really up to date and has an old-fashioned small screen when you can get this wonderful new 17-inch Westinghouse set?
As he looks around and he sees consumerism as a new means of social control, a means of placating the exploited workers by throwing them a bone, throwing them luxuries of life such as, television, Hollywood movies and extravaganzas that they can entertain themselves to keep them focused on the tasks of production, the tasks of serving the capital owners. And what he sees is a consumerist society is not only living in excess, living beyond its means, but also forcing the workers to produce beyond what is necessary for their own sustenance, and doing so at the benefit of the capitalists. How do they do this?
Well, she just pops Swanson TV turkey dinners in a hot oven.
Well, they delude the workers, they trick them, they draw them into a consumerist culture, and basically change their whole mindset of how to look at the world to whereas acquisition and luxury and getting the frill benefits of life are the ultimate aims of a life well lived. He sees this as the main factor that's undermining class interests from actually standing up and claiming what he thinks is rightfully theirs.
On May the 7th, in a little schoolhouse in Reims, France, came the unconditional surrender of Germany.
With the defeat of the Nazis and the liberation of Europe, Horkheimer and Adorno were able to return to Germany and did so in 1949. Notably, they went back to Frankfurt, in the capitalist western part of the now divided country, not to the Soviet-controlled New Workers' Paradise of communist East Germany. One of Horkheimer's assistants decided to stay behind. Herbert Marcuse was both a brilliant writer and a charismatic figure. He would carry on the work of the Frankfurt School, inspiring a new generation to take up the cause of Marxism, with far-reaching effect on America and the world. As we've seen, the question that dogged Marxist theorists throughout the first half of the 20th century was, where's the revolution? The search for an explanation led socialist thinkers far afield from economics. They blamed religion, the nuclear family, consumer goods, advertising, even Hollywood and Mickey Mouse. To socialists, the turmoil of the 1960s provided new evidence that America and the Western democracies were, if not ripe for revolution, at least edging toward chaos. For those who yearned for radical change, that was a good thing. Join us next time as we continue our look at the Unauthorized History of Socialism, Volume 2.